So let's dive in. Here's your objectives for this chapter. We're going to define what mixed methods research is, and then we're going to describe the processes of mixed methods research. So purpose and some characteristics. It creates a mixing of both quantitative and qualitative methods. It takes the sort of the best of both worlds, the advantages of each, and what happens in terms of the end product is a more thorough analysis than either one of those could provide on its own. So purely quantitative or purely qualitative, we're taking the best aspects of both and mixing them together to get a sort of a superior product. Just as a side note, not every research type study would warrant using mixed methods. So it's not superior because it can use both. It just is superior in cases where both is warranted. This does require a degree of expertise in both quantitative and qualitative procedures or methods, because you have to know at least enough about each to make this work. So some different types of mixed methods research design. There's an explanatory sequential, which is more quantitative, and then that leads to, with a mix of some qualitative, then we end up with our final product. But the quantitative is the dominant model. So we're going to focus on getting those results first, and then we're going to fill in the gaps with qualitative data. The exploratory sequential is exact opposite. We start by examining the research problem from a qualitative perspective, and then we, in the next phase, go to collecting quantitative results. There's also convergent design, which both parts are equal. The quantitative and the qualitative are both being collected at the same time, and both parts are equal. So let's look at these each a little closer. This is explanatory, where the quantitative is done first, and it is the more dominant part. So we're using, in this case, qualitative results to help prop up our quantitative data. So we collect the quantitative data first, and those findings determine the type of data collected in the second phase. So the qualitative data that's collected in the second phase. We're using qualitative analysis to help explain or elaborate, and that's basically tied back to the quantitative findings. So for example, you might send out a survey where students are answering questions, maybe on a Likert scale or something like that. And so we say the mean, the standard deviation was this or this. We can do t-tests and ANOVA to see if there's differences between the groups. But then we also do a survey or we also do interviews or focus group in the second phase to find out why people said what they said in terms of the quantitative data that we collected. So this is quantitative first, followed by qualitative. And the qualitative would be like maybe a handful of participants in a focus group to help explain why, they answered the way they answered in the quantitative instrument. Exact opposite, the exploratory sequential starts with the qualitative. So for example, we might look at some different concepts and hypotheses that we're going to explore. And then we may add a survey later on. So we may ask some in-depth questions and then send a survey later on where we actually get some quantitative data. So exact opposite process. The qualitative data is collected first. It's more heavily weighted than the quantitative. And we'll probably start with something like observations or open-ended interviews. And then from those observations, then we go to something where we can calculate numerical responses. All right, when both different research methods are equal, it's called a convergent parallel design. And so the quantitative and qualitative are of equal status. You're collecting both at the same time. This is the type of mixed methods research that I typically use, where I'm doing observations and I'm also collecting survey data at the same time. So it's concurrent in terms of the data collection, equal emphasis. The strengths of qualitative research help to offset the weaknesses of quantitative data. So for example, being able to look at why things are happening in a certain context might help offset just the pure numbers that I'm finding, and vice versa. The strengths of the quantitative So for example, quantitative data is more generalizable because usually you have a bigger N or a bigger population or sample. They help offset the weaknesses of qualitative data, meaning that it's usually context dependent. So sort of like the strengths of each help pour into making one study that is better because both parts are in it, right? And this is the type that I tend to use in my own personal research. So there are some advanced mixed methods designs. The first one's an experimental. I don't want to spend a lot of time on these, but I think it's important for you to see. So basically, this is like a typical, if you think like experimental design, in this case, the quantitative is more heavily weighted, the qualitative supports and supplements. And then we're collecting qualitative data before, during, and after. Can be explanatory, exploratory, or convergent. So it's kind of a mix of everything that we've talked about before, but you would have a control group, which is a little bit different in than some of what we've already talked about. A pretest and a post-test are usually integral parts of this. So that's just an experimental design. We're seeing if an intervention makes a difference. There's a social justice design where we have a theory, then we create some research questions. Then we're going to go back and collect some quantitative data. We're going to analyze that. We're going to present those quantitative results. And then we're going to collect some qualitative data. We'll look at the qualitative results, and then we're going to interpret how that qualitative data explains the quantitative results and calls for action. So all along the way, at every part of this process, we're looking for ways that we can make something better. And the purpose is to address problems that are happening and issues that may be happening in society as a larger whole. Okay, usually there's a framework that we're working under that helps us determine what we're supposed to be focusing on. And then last one here is a multi-stage evaluation design. And the difference here is that its purpose is to evaluate using both qualitative and quantitative, just like everything else, but different stages along the way, you are evaluating and then making decisions to move forward based on what kind of results you found. So you can see here, there's formative assessment and summative assessment. Formative assessment would be during the process, and summative program evaluation or summative assessment would be at the end. And so along the way, there's just different spots where we do assessment. So conducting mixed methods research, I think it's really fun because it gives me a chance to be able to do both types. It's never boring when I'm doing mixed methods research, but the research question or questions will help you determine whether or not mixed methods is an appropriate research design. The basic principles of research for both quantitative and qualitative have to be respected, and procedures still have to be reviewed by IRB. In fact, sometimes the IRB is a little bit more complicated because you have to describe in more detail. It's not quite as simple as like, I'm only just doing this. Usually there's multi-steps or multi-facets to what you're doing. I tend to use a concurrent design, like I said before, meaning that both types of data are being collected at the same time. But if you do a sequential design where you're going to do one and then the other, likely you'll have to do 2 IRBs or put in an IRB amendment for whatever the second phase is. I put a bullet here about the feasibility. Sometimes this isn't always feasible. So for example, in your action research, you have such a limited time to collect data that it may not be feasible to do one sort of method of data collection and then analyze those results and then do another type of data collection because there's just not enough time. So given the time, the resources, that's what I mean by feasibility. All right, same data analysis techniques apply when you're talking about mixed methods as you would if you're talking about quantitative. We still look at the quantitative data the same way. We still look at the qualitative data the same way in terms of data analysis. So here's a sample statement that I put together about inquiry, and you can see just talks a little bit about why this is sort of a superior method for the research that I was doing. And this is from a manuscript that I had published that was talking about teaching performance. Here's the resource that I use most of the time when I'm talking about mixed methods. This is one, if you could find this used, would be a good one to put on your shelf. Jennifer Green does a really nice job talking about all the different types of mixed methods research. So if this resonates with you, go ahead and try to find a use or copy of that. Okay, so just in summary, mixed methods creates a product that uses both to provide a thoroughly analyzed product. And you do need some expertise in each of these to make it work.